May 2020 in Swansea presented a deceptive calm. The world was in the grip of a global standstill. The streets were quieter, the traffic lighter, and the average citizen was tucked away behind closed doors. To the casual observer, nothing out of the ordinary seemed poised to happen. But in the shadowed back alleys and the labyrinthine estates of the city, a very different narrative was brewing on that would eventually shatter the facade of tranquility wide open. Two distinct worlds were on a collision course: the realm of ruthless, high-stakes supply empires, and the gritty reality of men desperate enough to steal from them. At the epicenter of this approaching storm was Jonathan Norris. At 38 years old, Norris wore the face of a man who had lived 2 lifetimes. The penal system has a specific way of aging a person, etching the stress of confinement into their features, especially when one's history with the law is as extensive as his. Norris had spent the better part of his adult life moving in and out of custody, accumulating 91 convictions like a collector hoarding grim souvenirs. His record was a mosaic of poor choices, unauthorized entries, physical altercations, and significant involvement in illicit supply. He hadn't started out this way. His early employment had been honest. But in this line of work, one wrong turn often dictates the next, and when legitimate funds didn't materialize fast enough, the streets were always there to fill in the blanks. By the spring of 2021, Norris was technically a free man, released on license after a brazen incident involving a post office and a confrontation with a community support officer. By all accounts, he should have been keeping a low profile, staying invisible to the authorities who were already watching him. Instead, he was huddled in a run-down council flat in Town Hill, conspiring with 2 associates to execute one of the boldest daylight heists Swansea had seen in years. This plan wasn't born strictly from greed. It was born from a terrifying necessity. Norris owed debts to individuals who did not believe in extensions or forgiveness. He knew the consequences of non-payment were severe, having heard whispers of others who faced intense physical retribution for far less. That fear, coupled with a bruised ego, made for a volatile mix. Norris harbored a grudge against the target of his heist, Nicholas Bailey. Bailey was a well-connected lieutenant in a sophisticated London to Swansea class a pipeline. Unlike Norris, Bailey didn't view himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a logistics expert, an entrepreneur wrapped in designer clothing. He was the strategy behind the supply, a man who moved product with corporate efficiency. Norris knew Bailey, and more importantly, he knew that Bailey and his partner, Ainsley Wood, had once cut him out of a lucrative deal. That slight made the upcoming job feel personal. Norris gathered a crew of low-level associatesmen with more muscle than foresight, because he didn't need thinkers for what came next. He needed action. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only expose a sprawling network, but would also end careers and set a new legal precedent for dismantling organized groups. Nicholas Bailey operated under a delusion of corporate legitimacy. He did not view himself through the lens of criminality, but rather as a logistics expert, an entrepreneur, who had simply chosen a high-risk, high-reward commodity. Starting his career in East London, he quickly ascended the hierarchy, eventually overseeing one of the most efficient supply chains in South Wales. Alongside his partner, Ainsley Wood, who managed the distribution network, Bailey moved significant volumes of high-value product from the capital down the M4 corridor, feeding the restless demand of Swansea's illicit market. Their operation was designed to be bulletproof, utilizing a network of trusted couriers and, crucially, encrypted communication devices that they believed placed them beyond the reach of the law. The tool of their trade was EncroChat, a secretive communication network used globally by those wishing to remain invisible. On this platform, Bailey adopted the handle Demon Fox, a moniker he felt projected a calculated and dangerous intelligence. He and his associates spoke freely of drop-offs, substantial debts, and strategic expansions. They adhered to a strict code, never use real names, never explicitly state the nature of the product, and employ ciphers like shirts for packages or paper for currency. However, even the most sophisticated codes cannot mask intent when viewed in bulk. Bailey was unaware that the EncroChat servers had been compromised by international authorities. Every message he sent, every boast about moving 3 shirts or collecting 106 paper, was being archived by detectives who were slowly building a digital map of his empire. The Swansea run in May 2020 was intended to be routine. It was a standard logistical maneuver in a world where one error could cost millions or result in a loss of freedom. An order for 3 units of product had been confirmed the previous evening via EncroChat by the head of the Swansea faction, Dale Martin. The message was brief: 3 to Swansea. Martin, confident in the local demand, had boasted to his London suppliers that he could move 5 units a week. To facilitate this, a white Volkswagen Caddy van was dispatched, driven by Alex Shields. Shields was an unassuming figure, originally from Newport, who maintained a facade of legitimacy through a fishing tackle business in Essex. In reality, his primary income was derived from his role as a trusted courier for the syndicate. On the morning of the operation, Shields navigated the Caddy down the M4. By 8:00 a.m., he had detoured south near Bristol to collect Nicholas Bailey. The 2 men were now physically overseeing the shipment, a move that indicated the high value of the cargo. At 9:45 a.m., they arrived in Taff's Well, north of Cardiff, dropping off a consignment at an industrial unit near Pontypridd. There, they collected £81,000 in cash proceeds from previous sales. This cash was not thrown into a duffel bag, it was secured in a highly sophisticated hide. The van housed a modified portable generator, accessible only via an electronic key fob, which contained a secret compartment designed to be invisible to casual inspection. With the first leg complete, the Caddy turned towards Swansea. In the previous fortnight alone, Shields had made 5 similar trips, transporting an estimated 25 kilograms of product. The lockdown restrictions meant fewer vehicles were on the road, increasing the risk of police checks, yet the syndicate's trust in Shields was absolute. By 10:45 a.m., they were on the Fabian Way, heading into the heart of the city. They carried 3 kilograms of product for delivery, and intended to collect a further 106,000. It was a business-as-usual morning, the van blending seamlessly into the sparse traffic. But as they approached their destination, the silence of the road was about to be broken. They were not just carrying cargo, they were carrying a target on their backs, and the hunters were already closing in. By 11:15 a.m., the Volkswagen Caddy had navigated the urban sprawl to the intersection of Townhill Road and Gores Avenue, eventually coming to a halt at a set of traffic lights on Compartment Road. To the uninitiated, it was just another commercial vehicle waiting for the green signal. However, the occupants, Bailey and Shields, were unaware that their anonymity had been compromised long before they reached the city limits. A digital eye was watching them. A tracking device had been covertly affixed to the chassis of the van, broadcasting their location in real time to a hunting party lying in wait. As the Caddy sat idling, an ambulance crew nearby noticed a black Ford Mondeo execute a sharp, aggressive U-turn under a railway bridge. The paramedics, focused on their own duties, could not have known they were witnessing the final positioning of a calculated ambush. The Mondeo, driven by Jonathan Norris, roared up behind the stationary van, effectively boxing it in against the traffic. In an instant, the trap was sprung. The Ford swerved around and cut across the front of the Caddy, blocking any forward escape route. Before Shields or Bailey could react, 2 masked figures burst from the Mondeo. The morning calm was shattered by the sound of impact, as crowbars crashed through the driver and passenger windows. The violence was precise and overwhelming, designed to shock the occupants into submission. Glass sprayed into the cabin as the attackers reached in, not for the men, but for the cargo. In a matter of seconds, they snatched a rucksack from Bailey's lapper bag containing 106,000 in cash, the proceeds from that morning's collection. The entire interaction lasted less than 20 seconds, a blur of shouting and shattering safety glass that left the couriers stunned. However, in the adrenaline of the moment, the robbers made a tactical error that would ultimately dismantle the entire operation. In a bid to ensure they weren't followed, one of the attackers reached into the ignition and ripped out the keys to the Volkswagen. It seemed like a smart move at the time, immobilize the target to guarantee a clean getaway. But in hindsight, it was a catastrophic miscalculation. By taking the keys, they stranded the van and its illicit contents right in the middle of a busy public junction, directly under the gaze of municipal CCTV, and surrounded by witnesses. As the Mondeo screeched away, vanishing into the Swansea traffic with the cash, the scene they left behind was chaotic. Nicholas Bailey, realizing the severity of the situation and the impossibility of explaining the cash-filled rucksack, fled the vehicle immediately, disappearing on foot into the surrounding estate. Alex Shields, however, had no such luxury. The van was registered in his name, and now, without keys, it was a 2-ton anchor tying him to the crime scene. He had to stay. When the police arrived, alerted by shocked motorists and the nearby ambulance crew, they found a shattered van and a shaken driver, playing the role of an innocent victim of a random road rage incident. But the van was not just a vehicle, it was a crime scene, and more dangerously for the syndicate, it was a vault containing evidence that Shields could not hide. The perfect robbery had just handed the authorities the first thread of a sweater they were about to unravel completely. The immediate aftermath of the robbery was a study in contrasts. While Alex Shields remained by the immobilized Volkswagen, weaving a narrative of victimhood to the arriving officers, Nicholas Bailey was already putting distance between himself and the scene. He had fled on foot, leaving his partner to handle the scrutiny of the law. Shields, bound to the vehicle by registration documents and the missing keys, had no choice but to play the part of the shaken courier. He told police he had been attacked, his passenger frightened off by the violence. The van, now considered evidence of a serious crime, was towed to a secure compound in the Swansea Enterprise Zone. To the police, it was just a damaged vehicle. To the syndicate, it was a ticking time bomb sitting in a government lot. As Bailey navigated his escape, his encrypted device was already burning up the network. He contacted Ansley Wood, his London counterpart, claiming he had been set up. The EncroChat channels, usually reserved for cool, calculated logistics, exploded with panic and paranoia. Who had the nerve? Was it a rival firm? No, the consensus grew darker. This had to be an inside job. The level of detail the robbers possessed, the timing, the location, the specific vehicle pointed to a betrayal from within. In the digital shadows, accusations flew. Dale Martin, the head of the Swansea faction, immediately suspected a leak. The trust that held their empire together was fracturing in real time. In a move that can only be described as audacious desperation, Martin contacted 2 of his local distributors, Daniel Harris and Leon Lay, instructing them to retrieve the van. Harris, known locally as a Flash Harry for his ostentatious displays of wealth and taste for expensive vehicles, and Lay, a former gravedigger turned garage owner, arrived at the police compound the following Saturday. Their goal was simple: get the van, and more importantly, the secrets it held, back into friendly hands. However, their arrival at a secure police facility to claim a vehicle involved in a major robbery did the exact opposite of damage control. It painted a massive red target on the entire group. The police, initially treating the van as merely the scene of a theft, were now deeply suspicious. Why were these individuals so eager to reclaim a damaged Caddy? Denied access. Harris and Lay left empty-handed, but their presence had tipped the scales. Investigators decided to look closer. A forensic team began a meticulous search of the vehicle, dismantling panels and inspecting every inch of the interior, in a process reminiscent of the French Connection. They weren't looking for fingerprints anymore. They were looking for whatever was worth risking freedom to recover. Their persistence paid off when they examined a portable electricity generator stored in the cargo area. To the naked eye, it appeared functional, a standard piece of equipment. But upon closer inspection, anomalies in the casing were found. It was a masterpiece of concealment, fitted with a hydraulic compartment that required a specific electronic fob to open. Lacking the fob, officers forced the mechanism with a hammer and screwdriver. Inside, the true nature of the logistics empire was revealed. Tucked away in the void were 1.25 kilograms of high-purity product, and $81,000 in cash. The robbery investigation had instantly transformed into a major supply inquiry. Operation Tilbury was born, and the countdown for every member of the gang had officially begun. While investigators were physically prying open the generator in Swansea, a far more devastating breakthrough was occurring in the digital realm. Unknown to Bailey, Wood and Martin, the impenetrable fortress of Encrochat had been breached. A massive international cyber operation, spearheaded by French authorities, had cracked the encryption protocols that thousands of organized crime figures relied upon. The server, once a black hole of information, was now spilling its secrets. For the police, it was like being handed a script for a play that was still being performed. Over 800 messages, exchanged across a 2-month period, were laid bare, revealing a timeline of conspiracy that was startling in its detail. The decrypts painted a chaotic picture of the hours following the robbery. The Demon Fox handle, used by Bailey, was frantic. The calculated business discussions regarding shirts, kilos of product and paper cash evaporated, replaced by a raw, unfiltered panic. The group was imploding. Suspicions turned inward immediately. Martin, the Swansea head, began to doubt the loyalty of his own team. In the encrypted logs, he pointed a finger at Leon Lay, the garage owner who had tried to retrieve the van. There were chilling discussions about bringing in outside enforcers referred to as El Bosto. Extract the truth from Lay. The proposed methods were severe. Talk of inflicting permanent injury to his feet, or pressuring his family to force a confession circulated in the chat. However, cool heads eventually prevailed in London. Bringing in external heavies would signal weakness to rival factions, a vulnerability they could not afford to show. They decided to keep the inquiry internal, unaware that their digital deliberation was being read by the very detectives they sought to evade. Simultaneously, the hunt for the robbers in the Black Mondeo was yielding its own surreal results. Police quickly linked the vehicle to Jonathan Norris, a career criminal well known to the local precinct. Norris was currently out of prison on license, a status that came with strict conditions, including the requirement to wear an electronic monitoring tag. It was this piece of technology that provided the investigation with its most ironic twist. In a stroke of forensic luck that almost defies belief, Norris' movements during the heist were not just tracked by cameras, but by the penal system itself. As he drove the getaway car through the residential streets surrounding the robbery scene, his ankle tag emitted a signal. Incredibly, this signal was picked up not by a distant satellite, but by a base station located in a house on Baptistwell Street, a residence, just yards from the traffic lights where the ambush took place. The house belonged to another individual who was also subject to electronic monitoring. Norris had essentially driven his tracking device past another tracking device at the exact moment of the crime. The data placed him at the scene with irrefutable precision. When officers finally caught up with Jonathan Norris, the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested and brought in for questioning. Faced with the GPS data and the undeniable link to the Mondeo, his demeanor shifted from defiance to resignation. He stared at the interrogation room wall, offering only a smirk when asked about Nicholas Bailey. "Yeah, I know him," he muttered. "He ain't a friend, though." Beyond that, Norris maintained a stoic silence, admitting only to being the driver. The identities of the two masked men who had smashed the windows and seized the cash remained a mystery he refused to solve. But for the police, his capture was the key that unlocked the wider conspiracy. The robbery had been solved, but the investigation into the victims, the men who lost $106,000 in illicit cash, was about to reach its crescendo. By October 2021, the sprawling narrative that began with a smashed window in Swansea reached its conclusion at the Crown Court. The press gallery was full, anticipating the final chapter of a saga that had gripped the local imagination. For the defendants, however, there was little suspense. The prosecution's case was a monolith of digital and physical evidence. They didn't need confessions. They had the logistics, the dates, the times, and the grievances, all typed out by the defendants themselves, on devices they thought were secure. The jury was shown screenshots of the Demon Fox messages, GPS logs from the tracking devices, and surveillance stills from the stash house. Every word typed on EncroChat was now a testament to their guilt. Judge Paul Thomas QC did not mince words in his summary. He characterized the robbery not as a crime of opportunity, but as a sophisticated strike against a high-level criminal operation. In targeting the van, Jonathan Norris had inadvertently done what the police had been trying to do for years. He collapsed a network that had distributed misery across South Wales. The sentences reflected the severity of the enterprise. Nicholas Bailey, the entrepreneur, received 13.5 years for conspiracy to supply. His partner, Ainsley Wood, was handed a staggering 15 years and 9 months. Dale Martin received 12 years, while the local distributors, Leon Lay and Daniel Harris, received 11 and 16 years respectively. Jonathan Norris, the catalyst for the entire downfall, was sentenced to 9 years for the robbery. But one question remained unanswered in the courtroom that day: where was the 106,000? The physical cash snatched from Nicholas Bailey's lap had vanished into the ether. Or so it seemed. The answer lay not in a hidden vault, but in the bank accounts of Jonathan's brother, Robert Norris. Following the robbery, financial investigators noticed a sudden and inexplicable surge in Robert's liquidity. While he had not participated in the violent smash and grab, the proceeds of that morning's work had found their way to him. Between June and August 2020, cash deposits totaling $66,740 were made into his accounts. When pressed, Robert claimed the funds were legitimate earnings from dog breeding, pub management and car sales. However, a deeper dive into his financial history between 2015 and 2021 revealed over $250,000 in unexplained cash credits of fortune for a man who had declared almost no income to the Inland Revenue. The evidence of money laundering was irrefutable. Robert Norris and his partner Natalie McBride, who had funneled nearly $24,000 through her own accounts, had no choice but to plead guilty. The sentencing hearing provided a final moment of grim theatre. As he was sent down, Robert Norris shouted abuse at the judge, a momentary lapse of control that cost him dearly. Hauled back into the dock, he offered a sarcastic apology, wishing the judge a Merry Christmas. The judge, unamused but precise, accepted the apology and then corrected a calculation error in the sentencing, effectively reducing the term slightly to 4 years and 5 months. "Merry Christmas," Norris muttered as he was led to the cells. In the end, Jonathan Norris became an unlikely, if accidental, anti-hero of the Swansea underworld. He wasn't revered, but his actions had shattered the status quo. Nicholas Bailey's empire was dust. Ainsley Wood's name was toxic in supply circles. And the EncroChat network was compromised globally. Yet, the irony was palpable. The entire collapse hinged on a single, split-second decision: taking the keys. Had the robbers simply taken the bag and fled, leaving the van running, the police might never have looked inside the generator. A simple act of caution became the architect of their collective destruction. As the proceeds of Crime Act proceedings began to reclaim the assets from the Norris family, it became clear that in this game of robbers and dealers, the only entity that truly profited was the government.